Hey there, welcome to the channel. I'm Ben, and if you guys haven't heard, Kawasaki just released some brand new sneak peek footage of their highly anticipated KLE adventure bike. So today we're going to closely examine that footage and see if there's any new information we can pull from it, and see if my predictions from last year still seem like they'll hold true about this bike being not only smoother and lighter than the old KLR 650, but also quite a bit more powerful. So if that sounds interesting, stick around and we'll get into it. For any of you guys who are unfamiliar with me in the channel, I've been riding dual sport motorcycles for over 10 years now. I've had a Gen 2 KLR 650, a Gen 3 KLR 650, and a Tenere 700 in between those two. I'm working on doing sort of light dual sport adventure builds on a DR 650 and an XR 650L. I've also got the new 2025 DRZ 4S there that will be slowly building into a light adventure dual sport. I don't personally do high mileage adventures. I like this dual sport adventure style bike just so I can get to my trails, which are about an hour away, and having something a little bit more comfy and fun in the corners is something that's important to me, which is why I'm really excited to see more light adventure bikes coming out like this that still have a decent amount of horsepower. And if you guys missed the video that I did on this bike last year, the way that the pipes sort of came out of the engine, from at least what we could see of it in that box at the EICMA bike show, it seemed like they were probably going to be using a motor that they've already been using in the Ninja 500. So that of course meant we could take a look at Kawasaki's website and see what sort of information as far as horsepower and torque and really even bike weight were on that Ninja 500, and then sort of extrapolate that data to see about what we might be able to expect from this KLE, whatever it's going to be. Kawasaki's website shows the Ninja 500 being a 451cc parallel twin with dual overhead cam. It's liquid cooled, and of course it's a 4-stroke. It has a rather high 11.3 to 1 compression ratio. The compression ratio on the KLR is only 9.8 to 1, so the 500 is definitely going to be a little bit higher strung. And Kawasaki doesn't actually say what the KLR puts out as far as horsepower goes, but it's somewhere around 40. The Ninja 500, on the other hand, Kawasaki claims puts out 51 horsepower, and that is at a rather high 10,000 RPM. A lot of times they will sort of tune these engines differently when they take them out of a sport bike and put them into an adventure bike, similar to the Tenere 700. I did see some comments on last year's video of people saying that they might tune this down a little bit to fit some of the requirements for overseas. I don't know what that will look like for the US or if any of that will transfer over here. Either way, I'm certainly hoping that we'll see a bike that has somewhere around 50 horsepower. I think that would be awesome. And that number gets even more exciting when you look at what the Ninja 500 weighs in comparison to the power to weight ratio for the KLR. And of course, the KLE is going to pick up some weight in comparison to the Ninja because, well, we're going to have bigger tires, we're going to have longer travel suspension. So the 377.1 pounds claimed by Kawasaki, with the Ninja completely road ready with all its fluids and everything, and with ABS, is not really a realistic number to expect for this bike, but I'm hoping that it's going to come in somewhere at right around 400 pounds, which maybe isn't the greatest for really hardcore off-road riding, but I've found that a bike somewhere around that weight is just sort of the sweet spot for a mix of that off-road riding and on-highway riding. Just gives you a little bit more confidence, you get blown around a little bit less, and it makes for a little bit more stable and enjoyable ride on the freeway. And if you take the 460-ish pounds that the KLR weighs and divide it by the 40-ish claimed horsepower that you usually see on that bike, we see that each one of the KLR's ponies has to lug around 11.5 pounds. Whereas if we take my 400-pound guess and divide it by the 51 horsepower that the Ninja has, the KLE is only going to have to haul 7.84 pounds for each of its ponies. So that should definitely make it a much better bike off the road and really on the road too. And speaking of high-speed on-road performance, one thing that a lot of you KLR 650 owners are going to be really happy to see, or at least we should be happy to see, I would certainly hope that Kawasaki is going to keep this, but that's the fact that the Ninja has a 6-speed transmission. Of course, for off-roading, they might need to change some things around, as I would assume that the Ninja probably doesn't have a really low granny gear. So hopefully they can do something to get us some sort of manageable kind of tractor-ish type power at lower RPMs, and then still be able to cruise really nice and comfortably at 70 plus on the freeway. Some other notable features that I would think should probably transfer over from the Ninja are the assist and slipper clutch and the ability to connect your smartphone to the bike. And I'm hoping that the bike screen will be large enough to actually transfer some form of navigable map. If not, hopefully they'll at least give us a place to put some sort of CarPlay unit like I've been putting on my dual sport adventure builds. And if you guys are unfamiliar with that technology, I can link a video in the upper right where I talk about the 2 CarPlay units that I've been using. So obviously still quite a few unknowns there, but things are looking like this could be a pretty darn good replacement for the KLR. And I know a lot of you guys really still love a lot of things about the KLR, like the simplicity of it. And I definitely agree with that. The KLR has always been an enjoyable bike when I've had one in the garage, but I think there are some things that I'm personally really gonna like about this, and I don't know if I'll pick one of these up or not. I am pretty excited about it though. So let's take a look at what Kawasaki gave us for the sneak peek here. It is pretty short. I will put a link for it down in the description if you guys want to check it out. And of course, this footage belongs to Kawasaki. I'm just using it under the fair use copyright law in the US or similar laws in other countries. So without further ado, let's take a look at it and see what we can figure out. So we've got a very outdoorsy, adventurous looking scene here somewhere in the mountains, and we've got what looks to be like almost an all-white bike, and it's a little bit hard to tell, but the back section almost looks like some sort of sport bike. The front, you can see, already has a low fender and somewhat of a rally-ish style looking fairing around front. It's not really too high up, but looks like there's some wind protection there. And then here's the bike coming at us, and it looks like we've got probably the sort of standard Kawasaki fog lamps or auxiliary lights, whatever you want to call them, hanging off of some part of the bike. And I don't remember there being any crash bars in those pictures from the EICMA bike show, so maybe there'll be something that we can see as far as crash protection goes. Otherwise, I'm not sure where they're mounting those. Looks like they're below the fairing, but not really attached to the forks. I don't know, I guess we'll see. So here we've got a close-up of the back wheel, and that rim looks much wider than what's on the KLR 650. That looks almost as wide as what's on the Tenere 700. And that looks like a pretty mean looking off-road tire, probably somewhere around a 50-50-ish rating, but definitely some decent sized lugs. As far as the diameter of the rim goes, I almost want to say that looks like it could be an 18, which is sort of a more serious off-road size rim. That's what the DR Z4S has, that's what the XR 650L has, and what the Tenere 700 has as well. We've of course got the Life's a Rally text on the screen, and you can see the professional rider here on the closed course sort of drifting around the corner, and the bike certainly looks pretty capable in his hands. Or her hands. Here you can kind of see a little bit better that back section of the bike. I guess it almost sort of reminds me of the back section of my 701 Enduro, which is interesting because the 701 Enduro actually has its fuel tank at the back, which keeps that fuel weight nice and low. It keeps it under the rider rather than above your knees. And of course, the old KLR, a lot of the tank hung down below your knees in those sort of saddlebags that the tank had. But that's interesting. I wonder if they moved the fuel tank to the back and that's why it looks that way. It could be something else, but the exhaust, as far as I can tell, looks sort of similar to what's on the Tenere 700 or even the Transalp 750, kind of low, probably the first thing to hit the ground if you tip the bike over on that side, which is certainly not a good thing. I would assume manufacturers like Camel ADV would probably put out some sort of a high exhaust mount kit for this, which is certainly something that I would want to do. The front, definitely a low fender. The fairing, I don't know, it seems smaller than I expected. And that is one thing that I never really liked about the KLRs. The Gen 2 and the Gen 3 with their windshield in the stock position both shot the wind kind of right under your helmet, which certainly wasn't enjoyable. Of course, things like the KLR dash on the Gen 2 or the GPS/windshield riser that I put on my Gen 3 really made those bikes, well, just about, I think, as good as you can get as far as a budget adventure bike for highway riding anyways. Although the Hemisphere off-road rally dash and windshield setup that I've got on the XR 650L adventure build is almost as good. It actually is just about as good from a upper body wind protection standpoint. And that bike, even with all the parts on it, probably only weighs somewhere around 350 pounds. So if you don't mind bolting some parts on, that might be a good build to take a look at. And of course, I can link that in the upper right if you guys want to check it out. Let's see what else Kawasaki's got here for us. Next up, we've got a close-up of the front wheel, and that definitely still looks like it's a 21-inch front with a rather large rotor. It's a little bit hard to see the tire, but when I looked back at those photos from the EICMA bike show, I realized that the front tire anyways looks exactly like the front tire that's on the DRZ4S. and that is an IRC Trail Winner, a GP410, which I'm finding probably needs to be replaced. And I think I would definitely replace on a bike like this. It is pretty smooth and nice for pavement riding, but if you want to get off the road and hit any sand or mud or anything like that, they really just don't hold up. And in comparison to the Pirelli MT21 that my buddy Jason has on his performance-built DR650, I mean, there's just absolutely no comparison. That's so much better of a tire and makes the ride so much more enjoyable. As far as the fender goes, this looks a lot bigger than what comes stock on the Tenere 700. And of course, back when I had the T7, I tried out the high fender kit from Camel ADV, which I ended up switching back to the low fender before I sold the bike to my dad, just because I didn't really like how the fender sort of was able to be caught by the wind at high speeds, and just seemed like bringing that fender back down didn't really trip me up off-road at all. So this is probably something that I would leave on here. My guess would be with the sort of added coverage in comparison to the Tenere, especially on that backside, this should provide a lot more protection for both you and the bike on the messy trails. Of course, if you're somebody that runs bikes in areas where you end up with that really packy, muddy clay, you could end up in a situation where that front tire packs up and you might bust the fender off. Of course, with the brake line and ABS line ran over the back, if you throw a stick up through that fender, that could certainly cause you some issues. So definitely some sort of not great things about a low fender and a brake line setup like this. But for this type of bike, so far, it seems like this tracks pretty well, and I think would work for the majority of riders. Let's see what else we've got. It's a little bit hard to see, but it still seems like we've got a rather large dual piston caliper. And I suppose I sort of already mentioned this, and really shouldn't be a surprise in 2026, but that second smaller cable running down next to the brake line, I would assume is going to be an ABS cable. And in my experience, honestly, ABS is just always a good idea. Even if you're an experienced rider, you never know what's going to happen out there. And as long as they give you the option to quickly turn it off for off-road riding and the ability to turn possibly maybe the rear or the rear and the front off, I mean, I'm totally cool with it, and I welcome ABS on bikes. The one thing that I'm seeing in this image that I don't like is that we've got a sort of minty green and gray pattern going on here, and maybe that'll look good with the rest of the bike, but as of right now, that's not exactly the color scheme that I would have picked. But of course, my Gen 2 KLR was sort of my baby, and in my opinion, there's nothing that beats that sort of deep candy apple green. The lava orange on my Gen 3 was also something that I really liked, where this, I guess we'll see what it looks like in person. And if we let this play through till here, we get our only glimpse of the engine, and it's actually not the engine, it's just the exhaust pipes. And as best I can tell, these are still going to be the same pipes that we saw poking out of that display at the EICMA bike show. So my best guess is we are still going to be looking at that Ninja 500 motor, which means somewhere hopefully around 50 horsepower and maybe somewhere around the mid 30s for pound-feet of torque. We also get a little bit of a glimpse of the skid plate here, which you could sort of see in those images at the EICMA bike show, but you can tell now that it's a pretty thin skid plate, meaning a material that probably won't handle any big hits off-road. And my assumption is going to be that we probably don't have a frame to sort of help protect that. So this is probably attached to the motor itself, or at least that's what it looks like in this image anyway. We can also see a little bit of the fairing, not really too much of an indication of the shape other than sort of a rally style fairing, which of course I think we already kind of knew. It does seem like the fender here kind of covers up the shiny bits of the suspension, and that certainly helps. But with an upside down fork like the DRZ4S here has, you definitely want to keep a close eye on that just to make sure you don't have any mud building up on it, because the next time you go out and ride, then if you don't clean it off, that can mess up your dust and oil seals. So you might possibly have a little bit more maintenance associated with this in comparison to, say, the KLR that had the fork boots that completely covered this part of the suspension up. Let's see what else we've got. Now, in this image, I would assume that we have probably 150 to 160 pound-ish rider, and it seems like we still have quite a bit of suspension travel left there. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly what's going on, but in the rough terrain here, that suspension seems like it's doing a pretty good job of whatever it is that he's running over here. Doesn't look incredibly soft, but certainly seems to be soaking things up. And of course, the later gens of the KLR were much better than the Gen 1, and even the 2014 and a half version of the Gen 2 was supposedly a lot better than the beginning versions of the Gen 2. But to me anyways, from what we can tell from this, definitely looks like it should be, I would think, better suspension than the KLR. And even just the fact that it's hopefully going to be about 60-ish pounds lighter should really help with that as well. So now we've got, looks like the bike going just back up that same curve. Can't really see a whole lot more. Fairing maybe looks a little bit higher in this image. That tail section definitely looks neat. I wish I could get a better look at that. So now here we've got a shot of the back wheel from the sort of up high perspective. You can definitely see the Tenere 700-ish looking exhaust on the far side. So that's definitely low and gonna be probably the first thing to hit the ground if you lay it down on that side. Back wheel definitely looks big. Things are sort of out of proportion here because I would assume this is shot with probably some sort of 360 camera. Chain definitely looks nice and wide, probably going to be about the same as the KLR, maybe a size or two up. The swing arm itself looks like the same sort of square tube design that the Gen 3 got, and you can see the adjusters for the chain slack are basically the same as the KLR. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's actually the exact swing arm off of the KLR. A little bit hard to tell, but I would bet that's the same part off of the Gen 3, or at least a very similar design anyways. We can kind of see the kickstand a bit, which looks different than the Gen 3 did. The foot looks different. The little triangle piece looks different. We've got maybe a passenger peg in silver, which almost looks like it's maybe not actually attached to anything. I can't tell what that is. You can see the guy's boot on the peg. And originally I thought this looked a lot like the pegs that came on both my Gen 2 and Gen 3 KLR with the sort of rubber slippery top on them. But looking a little bit closer, you can tell that the little pin that sticks out from the bottom of them isn't quite the same shape as what's on the KLE here. And it almost seems to me now like the top of the peg looks like it might actually be a grippy, toothy metal style peg, which was certainly necessary on that Gen 3, especially when it still had the rubber isolated pegs, which always drooped so much when you actually put your weight on them standing up that you felt like you're gonna slide off. Being a parallel twin, they may have not decided to rubber isolate them like they did on the Gen 3, but it was easy enough to fix on the Gen 3, so I would assume it would be on this bike as well. You can't really see the rear shock at all. Everything's just too dark. There is a bit of, like I said, that silver and then maybe some green. So that must be, I guess, some part of the frame. I'm really interested to see what that silver piece is. It looks like there's something missing. I wonder if that's maybe just where the passenger peg is supposed to be. Oftentimes when they're making demo videos like this, it's a bike that they had possibly been sort of working on in the factory. It's usually not something that's a production ready model. So my guess would be that there might be some pieces that are missing from here, or maybe pieces that are on here that we won't see on the production model. Yeah, they really just don't give us enough footage to see what that rear suspension is doing, but it certainly looks like it's hugging the trail pretty close. So let's move on and see what else we've got here. So a shot from the back. Can't really see much more of the bike. Rider is standing, and standing up pretty straight. Of course, we have no idea what his stature or inseam height is, but he looks like he's standing pretty comfortably, and those handlebars look like they're a decent ways up in the air, so this should be a pretty comfy bike to stand on. It certainly doesn't look like a very small bike. And from this view, it almost looks like that tail section is kind of skinny, and the front almost looks like it might be a little bit wider, so maybe our fuel tank is still up front. And of course, we've got the text on the screen coming soon, which, well, doesn't really mean a whole lot. My guess is Kawasaki is hoping to have these available in 2026, but you never really know these days, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And it looks like that's all they're giving us for now, so hopefully we'll be able to see this bike in its entirety at the upcoming bike shows. I'm pretty excited to see what this bike is going to look like. I really hope it measures up to all the estimations that I've made. If you guys saw anything in the images today that I didn't, definitely let us know down in the comment section and we can talk about it there. If you guys want to see more videos like this, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button. I'd love to have you guys watching along each week. Until next time, guys, take care, stay safe, stay swanky, get out there and enjoy this beautiful world God created any chance you get. And if you can't do that right now, here's some more videos to check out. In the meantime, we'll catch you guys in the next one.